I remember the exact moment I stopped being a husband and became a detective. It was a Tuesday evening in October. The kind of evening that feels ordinary right up until it doesn't. I was sitting at the kitchen table going through some old paperwork. We were refinancing the house, and I needed my medical records from 2003. Nothing dramatic. Just admin work while Karen was upstairs watching TV and the kids were doing homework. I found the letter from Dr. Harmon between an old insurance form and a receipt from a Home Depot run. 1 page. Clinical language. The summary at the bottom said it plainly: azoospermia, severe and permanent. 0 viable sperm count. Confirmed by 2 separate tests in February and March of 2003. I have 3 children. Ethan is 19. Lily is 16. Marcus is 12. I sat at that table for a long time without moving. The refrigerator hummed. I could hear the TV upstairs, some cooking show Karen liked. I heard Lily laugh at something Marcus said down the hall. Normal sounds. Tuesday evening sounds. I folded the letter very carefully, put it back in the folder, and went to make myself a cup of coffee. But let me start from the beginning. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 53 years old. I spent 26 years as a structural engineer for a mid-size firm in Columbus, Ohio. I'm the guy who looks at bridges and buildings and figures out why they don't fall down. I think in load tolerances and stress points. I am not, by nature, a dramatic person. I grew up in Dayton. My father worked for GM. My mother was a school librarian. We had a house with a vegetable garden and a dog named Chester, and we went to church on Sundays not because we were particularly religious but because that's what people did in our neighborhood. I was an Eagle Scout. I played baseball in high school, nothing special. I went to Ohio State on a partial academic scholarship, got my engineering degree, started working. I met Karen at a company picnic in 1998. She was there with a friend who worked in our accounting department. Karen was 24, recently moved from Cincinnati, working as a dental hygienist at a practice on the north side. She was funny in a quiet way. She had this habit of noticing things other people missed. She'd point out something small, a detail in a room or a person's expression, and suddenly you'd see everything differently. I found that attractive. I still do, in a complicated way. We dated for 2 years. Got married in June of 2000. Bought a house in Worthington, 3 bedrooms, good school district, attached garage. The plan was always children. We both wanted them. We started trying right away. By 2002 nothing had happened. The doctor visits started. Tests for Karen first, then for me. That's when Dr. Harmon delivered his findings. Severe azoospermia. He was kind about it. He explained the options: IVF with donor sperm, adoption, surrogacy. He gave us pamphlets. I remember driving home from that appointment feeling like the city looked different. Like someone had turned the saturation down a little. I was 30 years old and I had just been told I could not father children. Karen cried that night. I held her. We talked about the options. She said it didn't matter, that we'd figure it out, that she loved me. I believed her. I had no reason not to. 8 months later she told me she was pregnant. I was overwhelmed with joy. I assumed, because why wouldn't I, that we had quietly pursued one of the options Dr. Harmon had suggested. Karen was handling most of the medical coordination. I was buried in a major project at work, a parking structure renovation downtown. I remember thinking I should have been more involved in the process. I felt guilty about that. I asked her once which clinic we had used and she said something vague about a specialist in Dublin, and I accepted that and moved on. Ethan was born in April of 2004. He was healthy and loud, and he had Karen's eyes and what I assumed was my father's nose. I coached his little league team for 6 years. I taught him to drive in the parking lot of a church on Sunday mornings. He's at Ohio State now, studying business. He calls me on Sundays. Lily came in 2007. Marcus in 2011. Both times I assumed the same process, the same specialist, whatever arrangement Karen had made. I never asked for details. I was the father. The details didn't seem important. I want to be honest about something. There were moments over the years. Small things. A comment Karen made about a colleague that lingered a little too long in the room. A weekend conference she attended where she seemed distracted for a week afterward. A name, Derek, that appeared in conversations with a frequency that I noticed but chose not to examine. I am a structural engineer. I understand that you can see a stress fracture forming and choose not to document it because documentation makes it real. I chose not to document it. Until the Tuesday evening in October when the refinancing paperwork made the choice for me. I didn't sleep much that night. Karen came to bed around 10:30 and I lay next to her in the dark and looked at the ceiling and ran the math. The letter from 2003 was unambiguous. The dates of the pregnancies were facts. The conclusion was not complicated. What I felt was not rage. I want to be clear about that. What I felt was something closer to the sensation of biting down on a tooth that you didn't know was broken. A deep structural failure that had been there a long time, weight-bearing, invisible until the moment it wasn't. I got up at 5:30. Made coffee. Sat at the kitchen table again with the folder in front of me. I thought about what I knew and what I didn't know. I thought about Ethan at Ohio State. About Lily in 10th grade down the hall. About Marcus, 12 years old, who still asked me to check for monsters under the bed even though he knew it was a joke. I thought about all of it very carefully. Then I called my attorney. David Kessler has been my lawyer since 2009. I used him for a contract dispute with a subcontractor on a commercial project. He's thorough and quiet and he doesn't perform. I told him I needed to meet and that it was personal and urgent. He had a cancellation that afternoon at 2. I did not tell Karen where I was going. I said I had a site visit. I told David everything. I showed him the letter. I told him about the 3 children, the years, the name Derek that appeared too often. David listened without expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "Robert, before we do anything else, you need DNA tests." All 3 kids. Results before any conversation with Karen. Results before any decisions. I already knew that. But hearing it said plainly by someone else made it real in a way that sitting alone at a kitchen table doesn't. David gave me the name of a private lab that handled paternity testing discreetly. He explained the legal landscape in Ohio regarding paternity, child support, marital assets. He was matter of fact about it. He said, "Whatever the results show, you'll have options. But you need the information first." I drove home and made dinner. Spaghetti bolognese. Marcus set the table. Lily complained about a history project. Karen asked about my day and I said the site visit went fine. We watched TV after dinner. I went to bed at 10 and lay there calculating. The DNA testing took 11 days from start to results. The collection was easier than I expected. A private lab called ClearPath Diagnostics, they mail you a kit, sealed envelopes, buccal swabs. I did mine first. Then I waited for opportunities with the kids. Marcus was easiest. He had a dentist appointment and I took him, and while he was rinsing I got the swab. Lily left a water glass in her room that I collected. Ethan was the hardest because he was away at school, but he came home for a weekend in mid-October and I waited until he was asleep, and I was not proud of what I was doing, but I did it. I sent the samples in 3 separate envelopes. I paid for expedited processing. The results would go to an email account I created specifically for this, robert.c.structural@gmail.com. Karen had no access to it. During those 11 days I continued to be a husband and a father. I drove Marcus to soccer practice. I helped Lily with a chemistry problem set. I had dinner with Karen at a Thai place we liked on Friday night, and she talked about a patient at the dental practice who had been difficult, and I listened and asked questions and poured her wine. I was very calm. People who know me would not find that surprising. I have sat in rooms where a building's structural integrity was under question and remained calm. I have delivered bad news to project owners about timelines and budgets without raising my voice. Calm is not the same as feeling nothing. Calm is what you do with what you feel when the situation requires clear thinking. The results came on a Wednesday morning. I was in my car in the parking garage at work. I had checked the email account every morning for 11 days, and this morning there were 3 attachments. I opened Ethan's first. Probability of paternity, 0%. I sat with that for a moment. Then I opened Lily's. Probability of paternity, 0%. Then Marcus. Probability of paternity, 0%. I put my phone in my jacket pocket. I sat in the car for about 10 minutes. The garage was dim and quiet. Someone walked past pushing a cart of blueprints and nodded at me, and I nodded back. Then I went upstairs and did my job for 8 hours. That evening I called David from my car before driving home. He said, "Okay. Now we move." The next 6 weeks were the most methodical of my life. David filed for divorce on a Thursday, but before that we spent 2 weeks doing something that most people don't think about until it's too late: documenting the financial landscape completely. I pulled together every account statement, every investment record, every asset I could access. Our joint checking. My 401k. The home equity line. Karen's savings account, which I was a joint holder on and could therefore legally access statements for. David had a forensic accountant named Patricia review everything. Patricia found things. Over a period of roughly 9 years, Karen had been making transfers, small ones, irregular amounts, to an account I had no knowledge of. Never more than $800 at a time. Sometimes as little as $40. They were spaced out enough that they didn't trigger any flags I would have noticed. The total across 9 years was $63,000. Patricia also found that Karen had, 18 months prior, taken out a personal loan in her name only using a credit card I didn't know existed, in the amount of $12,000. The payments were being made from her personal checking account, which received a portion of her direct deposit. It had been invisible to me. David said she was building an exit. I thought about that. Maybe she was. Or maybe she was just building a cushion. Either way, it was information. In Ohio, marital assets are subject to equitable distribution. The house had appreciated significantly. We'd paid $240,000 for it in 2001 and current market was around $480,000. I had built the equity through 20 years of mortgage payments on an engineer's salary. David was clear about what equitable distribution meant and what we would argue it meant. I did one more thing during this preparation period, and it was not something David suggested. It was something I needed for myself. I hired a private investigator named Gary, who David had worked with before. I gave Gary the name Derek and Karen's workplace and her general schedule. I told him I didn't need anything dramatic. I just needed to know if the name had a face and a context. Gary came back to me in 9 days. The name was Derek Paulson. He was 47 years old. He ran a landscaping company out of Lewis Center. He drove a black Ford F-250. He and Karen had been meeting for lunch approximately twice a month for the past 3 years at a Panera on Polaris Parkway. Gary had photographs. They were not explicit. They were just two people who looked comfortable with each other in the particular way that people look when they have been comfortable with each other for a long time. Gary also found that Derek Paulson had a wife and 2 daughters in Lewis Center. I looked at the photographs for a long time. Then I put them in the folder with Dr. Harmon's letter and the DNA results and Patricia's financial analysis. It was a heavy folder. Now I need to tell you about the part of this story that kept me up more than the DNA results or the hidden account or the photographs. The part that I turned over and over in my mind during those weeks of preparation, the part one still think about. My children, and I use that word deliberately, because regardless of biology they are my children, did not know. They were living their ordinary lives. Ethan was navigating sophomore year at Ohio State. Lily was 16 and had just started dating a boy named Connor who she was trying to hide from us with limited success. Marcus was 12 and obsessed with Minecraft and the Columbus Crew. Whatever was about to happen in our house was going to land on them. I talked to a family therapist named Dr. Sandra Reeves before I did anything else. I did this on my own, without telling Karen. I sat in Dr. Reeves's office, plants, neutral colors, a white noise machine outside the door, and I laid out the situation. She didn't flinch. She had clearly heard things like this before. She said something I wrote down afterward: the question isn't whether this disrupts their lives. It will. The question is whether you can be the stable point in the disruption. I decided I could be that. I decided that was, in fact, the job. David filed the divorce petition on a Thursday in late November. He had arranged for Karen to be served at her workplace, not cruelly, just practically, because serving her at home with the kids present was something I wanted to avoid. She was served at 11:15 in the morning. I was at work. My phone was off. I got home before Karen that evening. I made dinner, chicken and roasted vegetables, something normal. Marcus was doing homework at the kitchen table. Lily was in her room. I heard Karen's car in the driveway at 6:40. She came through the door and I could see from her face that she had been crying and had stopped. She was holding herself very carefully. She looked at me across the kitchen and she said, "Robert." I said, "The kids are home. We'll talk later." She went upstairs. She came down for dinner. We ate, the 4 of us. Ethan was at school, and it was quiet in the particular way that families get quiet when the adults are holding something large and invisible between them. Marcus asked if everything was okay. I said everything was fine and we'd talk soon. He looked at me for a moment in that way 12-year-olds look at you when they don't believe you but don't want to push it. After the kids were settled, Karen and I sat in the kitchen. She had the divorce papers on the table in front of her. She asked me why. I opened my laptop. I had a folder on the desktop. I turned the laptop toward her and I said, "This is why." The folder had 3 items: a scan of Dr. Harmon's letter, 3 PDF documents from ClearPath Diagnostics. That's all. I didn't show her Patricia's report. I didn't show her Gary's photographs. I didn't need to. She looked at the screen for a long time. She started to say something and stopped. She tried again. She said, "Robert, the children." I said, "I know." She said, "They don't know." I said, "I know that too." I have spoken with a therapist about how to handle this with them. That is already arranged. She looked at me like I was someone she hadn't met before. I understood that. For 23 years she had known a certain version of me, thorough, patient, not particularly given to surprises. She was discovering that thorough and patient can build to something she hadn't anticipated. She asked me if there was any way to, and she paused for a long time looking for the word, to manage this differently. I said, David Kessler is my attorney. You need to get your own. What followed was not quick. Divorce, when there are children and a house and 2 decades of shared finances, does not move quickly. It moved through the winter and into spring. Karen hired an attorney named Miriam Feld who was aggressive and experienced. David had worked against her before and respected her, which she said was a good sign. It meant Karen had hired someone serious. Which meant this would be handled seriously. There were things I had not fully anticipated. The question of legal paternity is more complicated than biology in Ohio. I was the legal father of all 3 children. I was married to Karen when they were born. My name is on their birth certificates. I had raised them. David was clear that the DNA results, while devastating personally, did not automatically change the legal relationship. In Ohio, a husband who learns he is not the biological father can challenge paternity, but the court considers the children's interests heavily. The children were 12, 16, and 19. 2 were minors. David advised me to think carefully about whether I wanted to pursue a paternity challenge. He said, Robert, these are your kids in every practical sense. The question is what this does to them, not just to you. I thought about that for 2 weeks. I thought about it while driving Marcus to soccer. While helping Lily with college prep materials, even though she was only a sophomore, she started early. She's like me in that way. While talking to Ethan on the phone on Sundays, I decided not to pursue a paternity challenge. I decided that Robert Callahan is those children's father and that no document from a lab changes what happened at every birthday and every school play and every Sunday morning in a church parking lot teaching a kid to drive. But I also kept the DNA results. Because there was someone else who needed to know about Derek Paulson. I had Gary put together a basic report: Derek's name, his address in Lewis Center, his wife's name, which was Sandra, his company. I mailed it to Sandra Paulson in a plain envelope with no return address. I included one of Gary's photographs, the Panera lunch, nothing explicit, just the 2 of them. I included a single typed line: this has been going on for at least 3 years. You deserve to know. I don't know what Sandra Paulson did with that information. I don't know if she already knew. I didn't follow up. It wasn't my situation to manage. I just thought she had a right to the same information I had. The divorce proceedings ground on. Karen was living in the house. We had agreed, through the attorneys, that she would stay with the kids and I would take an apartment. I found a 2-bedroom in Worthington, 5 minutes from the house, so I could be present for the kids' schedules. I paid rent and continued to pay the mortgage on the house while the proceedings continued. David told me this was expected and that it would be factored into the settlement. The financial picture was the most contested part. Karen's attorney argued for 50% of all marital assets, including the home equity. David argued that given the circumstances, he did not use the word adultery in the proceedings, but the circumstances were on the table. A strict 50-50 split was not equitable. Patricia's report about the hidden account transfers became relevant. Miriam Feld argued they were Karen's personal savings. David argued they were marital funds redirected without consent. The mediation session happened in February, in a conference room at a law firm downtown. Karen and I were on opposite sides of a long table. I had not been in the same room as her in 11 weeks. She looked tired. I probably did too. The mediator, a retired judge named Harold Garvin, worked through the numbers methodically. Home equity, retirement accounts, the hidden account, the personal loan, Karen's pension from her dental practice. At the end of 3 hours, Judge Garvin had a proposal. I would get 62% of the home equity. Karen would get 38%. My retirement accounts were mine. Karen's were hers. The $63,000 in the hidden account would be split. I would receive $31,500 as compensation for misdirected marital funds. The personal loan was Karen's responsibility. It was not everything David had argued for. It was more than Miriam Feld had offered. I looked at the numbers and I thought about the folder with Dr. Harmon's letter and the DNA results and the photographs, and I thought about 23 years and I said yes. Karen said yes too. I think she understood that the alternative was a trial where the circumstances would become more explicit and more public. I think she had enough left of the Karen I had married to want to protect the kids from that. The day the divorce was finalized was a Tuesday in April. It had been almost exactly 6 months since I found Dr. Harmon's letter in the refinancing paperwork. David called me at 2 in the afternoon. He said, "It's done." I said thank you. I was in my car in the parking garage at work, same spot where I had opened the DNA results 5 months earlier. Same dim light. Same quiet. I called Ethan first. He knew, of course, I had talked to all 3 kids, with Dr. Reeves's help, in January. Those were the hardest conversations I've ever had. Not because they were angry at me. Because they weren't. Ethan said, "Dad, you're my dad." Just like that. Lily cried, but she held my hand the whole time. Marcus asked if we were still going to go to crew games, and I said absolutely we are, and he nodded like that settled it. Ethan said, "How are you doing, Dad?" when I called him in April. I said, "I think I'm okay." He said, "I'm coming home this weekend." I said that would be good. There are things I want to say about the months that followed that are harder to articulate than the legal proceedings or the financial details. Karen moved to a smaller house in Gahanna, about 20 minutes away. It was a rental, 2 bedrooms, a significant reduction from the 4-bedroom colonial in Worthington. She was still working at the dental practice. I don't know much about her daily life, and that is appropriate. The kids split their time. Lily and Marcus had a schedule, weekdays mostly with Karen during the school year, weekends and 2 evenings a week with me. Ethan was at school, but when he came home he stayed with me. Not because of any formal arrangement. Just because that's what he chose. I noticed things about my children in those months that I think I had been too busy to see before. Ethan has my father's patience, that same quality of stillness when he's thinking through a problem. Lily has a precision about her that I recognize. She'll be an engineer or a scientist or something that requires exactness. Marcus is funny in a quiet way that surprised me. He makes these small, dry observations that come out of nowhere, and they're genuinely sharp. None of this is biological. All of it is real. My apartment was a place I had chosen carefully. Enough space for the kids when they stayed. A 2nd bedroom with a decent bed. A kitchen where I could cook. I'd been the cook in the house for years, and I kept that. On weekday evenings I cooked dinner and whoever was there ate. Sometimes it was just me. Sometimes it was Marcus. Sometimes Lily brought Connor, who turned out to be a decent kid. I bought a 2nd TV and set it up in the living room, and Marcus and I watched crew games, and I was present in the way I had not always been present before. I went back to Dr. Reeves on my own, twice a month. Not because I was falling apart. Because she helped me think clearly about things that were hard to think about clearly alone. One session she asked me if I had forgiven Karen. I thought about it for a while before I answered, which she expected. I said I didn't think forgiveness was the right word. I said I had made a kind of peace with the fact that I had been given a life I didn't know I had, 3 people who call me dad, a job I'm good at, 23 years of holidays and ordinary Tuesdays that were real even if they were built on something false. I said I was trying to hold both of those things at once without letting either one cancel out the other. Dr. Reeves wrote something in her notebook. She said, "That's very mature." I said, "I'm 53. I should be." There's one more thing. In June, about 8 months after I found the letter, I was at a crew game with Marcus. We were in our usual seats, section 122, which we've had season tickets for since Marcus was 7. It was a warm evening, the kind Columbus gets in early summer, still light at 7:30, the crowd easy and loose. Columbus was up 2-0 in the second half and Marcus had eaten 2 hot dogs and was in the particular good mood that a boy gets when his team is winning and his father is next to him. He leaned over at one point and said, out of nowhere, the way 12-year-olds produce things out of nowhere, "Dad, are you sad about everything that happened?" I thought about the question seriously. I looked at the field for a moment. I said, "Sometimes." "Are you?" He thought about it. He said, "Sometimes. But not right now." I said, "Me either." He went back to watching the game. Columbus scored a third goal and he was on his feet yelling and I was on my feet next to him and the evening light was gold on the grass and the crowd was loud and I thought, this is what was always real. The folder with Dr. Harmon's letter is in a filing cabinet in my apartment. The DNA results are in there too. The photographs. Patricia's report. I don't look at them. I don't need to. They did their job. I go to work. I come home. I cook dinner. My kids call me dad. Some structures hold because of what you can't see. The load-bearing elements buried in the walls, in the foundation, in 20 years of showing up. Invisible until you test them. I tested them. They held. That's enough.